Welcome to this week's SV Lynx video. This week we are going to be fairing the hull and testing basalt versus fiberglass with an axe and running it over with a car.
So it'd be a lot of fun, so let's get to it. Monday morning, after our very successful Saturday, a nice day of rest on Sunday after that hard work. But our team got this done very well, but what we haven't done is wrap the nose here. And so we're putting a couple of extra layers over the top over here, and that's simply because due to the stair-stepping of the twisting boards, we had to sand down to the foam in a lot of places. Just this section right here. And so we want to coat this with a little bit of extra laminate. So we're going to put 2 layers of basalt over the top, and then we're going to put on 2 layers around the nose here. And so that'll all tie in together, and that'll make this whole nose area strong and make it back to a thickness here that is the way it should be. And so that's our deal for this morning. Now, we already measured out and cut all the basalt, and we've already wiped this down with alcohol, so it's ready to go. So I'm going to start mixing epoxy and we'll get this going. All right, we've got our 2 layers of basalt over the wrap, and now we're putting the nose pieces on. It's interesting how it turns from this bronze color, turns black once you get the epoxy on there, which is nice because you can see, unlike carbon fiber, you can see where the epoxy is thick enough. Give me some more epoxy on there. Now we're going to put a little lighter and narrower
down, good
section on here. There's a little exposed spot right here that, due to the having to cut it around this curve, so we're going to put one more piece on right now. All right, time for some peel ply.
We have one for the front.
Oh, that's right. Got to get high enough to be over the top of this one over here, though. Okay, don't worry about it going below that. We got to get it on top of this.
All right.
I call it done. Nose of the boat is done for today. The next thing we're going to do is something I've been promising for a while. So we're going to make up some squares of foam, and we're going to put basalt on one in the same approximate layers as, well, not approximate, the same layers as the fiberglass on the other. Same biaxial weaves, all that, same exact stuff. We're going to use however much resin that they need to use to wet out properly, and that won't necessarily be the same because the basalt may take less resin, but that's just part of the test. So we'll wet them both out to the proper level of how much epoxy needs to be in there. And then, once these harden up for a few days, come Friday or Saturday of this week in this video, we're going to start impact tests and weight tests, and as in how much weight can they support, how much impact can they take from a sharp impact. And we're going to find out if this basalt is a little stronger than the fiberglass. And so we're going to give that test. We'll show it in the video this week. So Brian's cutting out the squares that we're going to use for our basalt versus fiberglass test right now. We're going to wet out all of these different panels here so that we are ready to start putting in our fiberglass layers and our basalt layers. Well, today we're going to get started on the very large job of fairing the hull. Now, we're not going to try and do the whole hull today. We're just going to get a section of it done. But that means we get to start by pulling some peel ply off the boat. Objective on this first one was to get a thin layer of fairing compound on, and we're trying to fill in the washboard effect you get from flat surfaces of these strips. You're not going to get a curved surface because each of the strips is flat, and so there's going to be a bit of fill in between the high points, and you can see that in the striping that goes down. So we wanted to fair it this direction with a light coat just to sort of fill this in and get this a bit rounder. Once this is set up, we'll sand it all down and go to another wipe, and this time we'll probably come down from the top to fill any gaps that are that direction. So it's going to take, I have no idea how many, but at least 3 applications and sand, application, sand, application, sand, and then we'll see how we are. At that point, we'll probably dye the surface, and when we sand it, we'll be able to see any high or low spots at that point. But it's no sense in that to begin with, because we know there's still going to be low spots in here. So this is going in stages. We'll get it improved over time. So many rounds. Now the goal in fairing this, according to Schoening, is not to coat this whole hull with a thick amount of fairing compound. That's why you still see the hull, the black from the basalt, showing through in a lot of places. We want the thinnest coat of fairing compound necessary to get this to a smooth surface. Not coating the whole thing with a lot, because that just adds weight to the boat. And frankly, fairing compound is not as strong as the basalt and such is anyway. So we don't really want a heavy layer of fairing compound. We just want as light as we can to fill all the low spots in here. And this is obviously not enough. We will sand and put more on, but still we want to keep it to the thinnest coat possible, which was our goal. Now, which fairing compound are we using? Well, that's easy. We're not using a brand name fairing compound, we're mixing our own. And this, again, a part of the way the kit comes from Schoening, because it's much less expensive to do it this way. Because fairing compound is really just epoxy. And all you're doing is adding a couple of different fillers, micro balloons and silica. Micro balloons are put in there to make it easier to sand, and we go somewhere between 3 and 6% on micro balloons. In our case, we're shooting right in the middle, about 4%. And the other part, the silica, is just to thicken it up to a consistency that isn't going to run as it sits on here. And so that's a little bit more than mayonnaise consistency. A little bit towards peanut butter, but not that thick. So somewhere between that mayonnaise and peanut butter. And we just mix our own and put it on, and so it just comes in these powders, and we just take our regular Sycamine laminating epoxy, because we're laminating the surface here, and with fairing compound. And now this should sand a little easier than if it was just epoxy, which is very hard stuff. So the micro balloons in there will give it a little bit easier to sand. But of course, the more micro balloons you put into it, the weaker the epoxy becomes. So you don't want too much, just enough so that it sticks while you're working it. And you have to really work it. You have to scrape it on, scrape it off, and get it to break the surface tension as you're going, and get it to adhere well when you start. So those are a bunch of things that we're not experts, but we have been told by experts all of the things I just explained to you, and so that's what we are attempting to do. So as you can see, we've got our fairing compound from yesterday on there, but today we went ahead and took the peel ply off the bow here, and we're going to go ahead and put fairing compound on the bow, and it came out pretty nice. So this should be nice and strong here, since we had thinned it up a bit. We added these couple extra layers and weren't called for it in the plans up here, and that's just simply because we took out some of that laminate when we were sanding it, so we put Basalt on to replace it. So it's all good, and the front looks good. It's all nice up here. So we're happy with how this all came out. So we're going to fair it today, and then after that, we're going to move back and try to get some more of the hull faired that direction. And we'll see how that goes and how far we get today. Another thing we discovered yesterday is that the Sycamine doesn't set up really fast. And so we were in a hurry yesterday, and we didn't need to be, because we have some time to work this. So we can take a little bit more time, and that means we make a little bit less mass, because we got a lot on the tool yesterday. And that meant a lot of cleaning afterwards. So I'm trying to be a little cleanlier today, and taking a little bit more time as we do it. We're using this scale here with milliliters, and we have 3 weights that we use. First, we bring the epoxy up to like 500 milliliters. Then we bring the hardener up to, I think it's 635 for that. And then we put in the balloons, micro balloons, and that brings it up to 661 in the milliliters. We mix that up, at which point we start mixing in silica. Now that's not by weight anymore. With the silica, we just bring it up to the consistency that we want, which is thicker than mayonnaise, but not as thick as peanut butter. So it shouldn't really run off of that stick at all. That. So that's pretty close right there. Okay, so that blends right over there. So the thing left on this is we're going to put a bit of a sharper peak on this. I'm not trying to make this perfect. We'll have to sand this to get it nice, and then what'll happen is we'll put on another layer, and it'll get closer and closer to what we want. So Brian's gonna mix up. I think you're probably just gonna keep mixing right now, because by the time you get that mixed, I'll need you to start mixing the next one. This is left over from the bow up there, but we have time to work this stuff. It's early in the morning, it's not very warm. And so we're not terribly concerned about getting this done super fast, so. Okay, again, that's just to break that surface tension a little bit, but I'll have to wait on the next batch to put a little bit more on there so that I can scrape off. It's a constant battle to keep this epoxy off the top edge of this tool. I suppose if I was really good at this, which I'm not yet, that would be easier. But every once in a while I catch an edge and it scoops up a little epoxy up onto the wrong side or something. And I get a little epoxy where I shouldn't. Pros we're not, but we're working on it. We're learning. All right, Brian's mixed up another batch. Right now, we only have so many trowels, and it's best if one of us is mixing and one of us is troweling, because that keeps the troweler supplied and we're not waiting. So. The other thing we want to do is, when I do receive one of these, is get it out of this container onto the side of the canoe here, because it lasts much longer spread out than it does concentrated in here. So even though I'm not going to trowel this part for a moment, it's better to have this stuff on the hull. And it doesn't matter if I put too much over here. It'll just trowel off and we'll move it over to a different part of the hull at that point. So out of the bucket. I'll put this back in the bucket temporarily because I'm going to be doing the other side of this in a moment. We'll move it over there. It's 10 o'clock. We started this at 8, so it's only taken us 2 hours to do that nose. And then from here all the way back there, which is almost twice as much as we got done yesterday. And that's just by 10 a.m. So the fairing is going well. It's really not that hard. We've gotten a sort of a plan down now where Brian's mixing and I'm putting on, and he gets one mixed right as I need it. Seems to work out in timing just about right. And that way we can just march right on down and do this efficiently, because we have to do it many times, so we want this to go quickly. This is the hardest one, the first one, because we have the most material that has to go down. Second one will be pretty difficult as well, but then we'll get into the third and fourth, and those will start getting spot checks and those will get easier and faster. So it's going along well, and we're not getting too much fairing compound on the hull, which I like, because we want to keep this hull light so this boat stays fast. So it's after lunch now, and we're going to try and get this section right here done today. That'll get us to 2/3 of the entire hull. Our goal of the day is complete. We got our first layer on. It's by no means complete. Friday, we'll be back and we'll do the back part, the last third of it, which should easily be done in one day. We did a lot more than that today, so should be easy enough. And so Friday then, and then Saturday maybe we'll see if it's set up enough. If it's not set up enough to be sanded on Saturday, because it usually takes 2 to 3 days to get this, especially since it's very humid right now. Instead, on Saturday, very likely we're going to do our basalt test. And so we made up these squares of fiberglass the way this hole would have been done, exactly the way it would have been done, and basalt exactly the way we did it. And we have a couple different ones. We have squares that are exactly the same amount of grams of both to see if there's a difference there. And then we also have a test for what we did for the hull versus what should have been on the hull. And we'll do some impact tests and some flexing tests and some different stuff, and just see if there's a difference between the fiberglass and the basalt. And so I think we'll do that Saturday. And we'll have some fun playing with these things, see what it takes to break them. Good morning. We are here with Garrett. He has come over and volunteered to help build a boat. So you know what we do with volunteers? We put them to work. So today we're going to finish off the rest of the initial layer of our fairing compound on, as I mentioned earlier in this video. So that we need to get this peel ply off all the way, and so we're going to start with that.
Gloves on.
All right, then Garrett and I will do it. Oh, this, by the way, this stuff's much harder to peel than you think. One. All right, back over to this end. Sweet. Well, Brian and Garrett are mixing up the first batch for me in the back. I thought I'd take a moment to talk a little bit more about the technique we're using to put this on, because the only way this works is that these applicators here from FlexiSander flex. And if you're using a hard flat surface, you really can't go on this because you can't match that round curve. So most of the time you'll see with using flat applicators that they're going to bring it down this direction here, and they're going to put a thicker layer of fairing compound on, about 5 millimeters, and then use a notched trowel and put notches in it down. So it leaves, it's 5 millimeters high, but it's in grooves. That makes it easier to sand down, because what you're doing is you're trying to get the curvature by sanding down to it. But that wastes a lot of fairing compound and takes a lot of sanding, because you got to take, even though it's only half because of the grooves in it, it's still 5 millimeters that you've got to take all the way back down to this level that we're at right now, because you don't want to have all of that fairing compound on there. But for us, because we have this curved applicator and it'll match this hull, we can take and scrape this direction and leave those spots here so that this is curved between the high points of the flat panels as I showed earlier. And so the only reason we can do it this way is because we have these flexible applicators. And this leaves a lot less sanding. I mean, a lot. Because we don't have to take this down that whole 5 millimeters now. We're just going to smooth it a little bit for any ridges that we have in it, like here. And we're just going to do a light sanding and get this back ready for the next application. And then we'll probably take and do one from the top next, but again in a very thin layer. And then we'll sand it again, and then we'll do another layer coming across this way again. By the time we do one this way, one this way, one this way, this is going to get pretty smooth and round without having to do a ton of sanding. And so that's only possible because of these curved applicators. And also the sanding, we're using a sander that is a power sander that also curves. I've showed you that before, the FlexiSander. So that'll help us follow these curves as well and get it sanded pretty quickly. And we'll do a little of that sanding later today. So that's why we're doing this sideways application first, and then we'll do one down from the top. and we'll be seeing that in a couple days probably when we get to that. With Garrett here to help, we decided to switch things up a little bit. So I'm having both Brian and Garrett mix epoxy, but while Brian is putting in the fillers and mixing up, Garrett is just starting on his batch with the epoxy. That way they can deliver it to me and spread it on the hull for me before I spread it out with the Flexi sander. We finished up the first layer of fairing compound on the hull, so we're letting that set up. So while we're doing that, we're going to laminate this bulkhead. And so we're cutting out our fiberglass, and we're going to exchange out the fiberglass strip that goes along underneath of this to carbon fiber, because why not? We had some. So right now we're just cutting the top piece out of fiberglass here. Okay, so this one's ready to rumble. Let's roll it up. Put it back in a minute. This is unidirectional, but it's meant to be unidirectional fiberglass, but as I mentioned, we're going to use unidirectional carbon fiber. And why are we doing that? Because we had it left over from doing the forebeam, and why not? It'll be a little stronger, so we'll be happy with that. All right, so we're going to take this and stretch it tight, and then you'll have to back up a little bit, I think. You got to come down. All right, so about a quarter inch or a half inch from the end. Okay. So we'll get wet on wet. We'll get the best bond we can get that way. That's why we pre-cut it. Now all we have to do is wet this part out and this part right here. That was about the right amount for this. We're going to need to mix another, I would say, 300. If you want to start mixing that. To put on top, you know.
You want me to pour this on something?
I'm going to fix that. I just want to make sure this stuff's right before I do the end, in case we have to move it. Looks fine. Okay. Okay, let's put this on. So we're going to go right here, and then we're just going to cut it out. So
This end and we'll walk it down.
yeah, hold that as much as you can.
Set it down.
There's another metal roller in there. These forms, however, we're not going to destroy them yet or throw them out. We're going to chop them up into 3, maybe 4 pieces, move it, and we can use this to just hold our forebeam while we're waiting for it when we get the holes done. So that's what we're going to do right now. Like I said, we had one spot that we could put this right now. That's it. Crazy hot summer right now, and we're getting certain kind of weather conditions where we could have a little tropical moisture swing up for a short thunderstorm. We've covered the long 50-foot pieces that we have put together for the near future against the wall over there, and so we covered them all with plastic so that if it does rain we won't get anything on them. And right now, even though this forebeam is completely coated in carbon fiber now, it's probably fine out in the rain, but we have plastic around anyway, so we're going to go ahead and cover it just for the heck of it, just in case there's a short storm. We don't have to deal with any moisture on it at all. So since we finished putting on the fiberglass and carbon fiber on this side of the bulkhead, we're going to do the same thing on the other side to make this very strong. So we got to flip this over first. So take 3 of us, so here we go. All right, now up. Good? Yep, keep coming. Bulkhead 8 is flipped over, and now we'll get to work on this. Good morning. It's time to start testing our basalt squares that we made up against the fiberglass squares we made up. And we're going to start out with one of our squares from fiberglass that has been exactly made the way the fiberglass was supposed to go onto the hull, the exact number of layers, front and back, so that this is approximating exactly the strength of the hull as it would have been had we not used basalt. And what we're going to do is, instead of shooting the panel, and the reason we're not going to shoot it isn't because we didn't want to shoot it. The reason we're not going to shoot it is simply because the ranges around here won't let us take our squares in and shoot them. They only use regular targets and such, and if to go to a place where we could shoot our squares, it's like a 6-hour round trip from here, because we're in the middle of a big city. So as such, we don't want to drive 6 hours to do this test. So instead, we're going to use the Axomatic, which we just made up here, to hit this with an axe. And so we're going to see how far in that axe penetrates into it. So we take the axe, we're going to go all the way up here so that it basically vertical, and I'm just going to release it from vertical and let it do its damage. So here we go. We interrupt the Axomatic because we have a question for you. How many of you think it's going to break this panel? How many of you think it's going to cut a hole into it? And how many of you think it's just going to bounce right off? Let's replay that and let it go. Here we go. All right. So, as you can see here, this is the slice, and it has barely penetrated the outer layer of the thing, but this came through that without any real serious issues. Now, we'll take our basalt. Now, this particular basalt is the exact same weight as far as grams, the exact same number of layers, front and back. It's identical to that, except for it's in basalt. So we'll load this one up. Take our axe all the way back up to vertical again. And release. Okay, there's definitely a mark here from where the axe hit, but there's no penetration of the material at all. It's hard to see here, but there's actually a slice into the fiberglass where I can get my fingernail there, and that's inside the slice. So it has sliced through the outer layer here, and it has not sliced through this. It's just marked it. But it is not sliced through. So the Basalt wins in the axiomatic test. I just wanted to mention a couple things. These tests are by no means scientific. We are just having some fun and doing our own little tests, but if you want to see some actual scientific data on the difference between fiberglass and basalt, it's out there, and I'll see if I can put a link for you to an article, either that or down in the description. But we were thinking, after we did the first test with the axe, this is kind of a rusty old dull axe, so what if we redid the test with a sharp axe and put a lot more weight behind it so it really hit those panels hard with a very sharp edge. So I'm going to go sharpen this baby up, and then we'll add some weight to it and we'll retest this and see how that goes. All right, so I took a little rust off. Now let's get this edge sharpened up here. All right, well, it's all sharpened up, so let's give it a little test. Oh yeah, much sharper now. We've sharpened up our axe to a very razor edge. I've added 25 pounds of lead onto it to give it far more strength as it hits. Let's see what it does to the fiberglass layer one first. This will be a lot heavier to deal with. Go up right even with these bars. Not much difference. With a sharp axe, it's still going through the outer layer where I can get my fingernail caught in there. So it cut through that outer layer. Now let's take a look at the basalt. Okay, I've reloaded up with our basalt layer with a brand new panel, so it hasn't been hit before. And we'll do the same thing. We'll take it up to this level with this heavier version here. That's heavy. Okay. Like before, the outer layer of epoxy that's on the outside gets pretty much crushed, but it gets down to the basalt layer and there isn't a slice in there. So it doesn't really seem to matter if I put a sharp axe on it and hit it with 25 pounds of lead, bringing it down. Both did really well. The basalt did slightly better again. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to try and see a flexing test on it and see how that goes. So we're going to drive a car over it next. We'll use a different one so that they're not weakened by these impacts. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to drive the car tire up onto here. We're going to see how much flex we get, and we'll get it up on there, and if it doesn't break, I'll get out and measure how much of a flex we got on it with that, and then we'll try the basalt. We'll go with the fiberglass first. Certainly not breaking, but it is flexing, so we're going to measure how much flex. So we're at 34 millimeters. And now we're going to go ahead and try the basalt and see the same thing. Now it's important to note that this piece of basalt is the exact equal of that in layers and grams. So this is identical to that one. But we're going to try it both with the one that's identical and the one that we built into our actual hull, which we'll do as a third test here. Okay, this one didn't break either. But how much flex do we have? It's precisely at 4 millimeters, so this is flexing much less than the fiberglass is. Okay, so here's the Basalt version that is exactly what we built our hulls out of. It's not equal to the fiberglass anymore. It's actually less grams thickness than the fiberglass is. So let's see how it does against the thicker fiberglass. So in this final test of the exact basalt that we used on our hull, it turns out that when I measure it, it comes out from the ground up to the bottom of the board where it bent to 3.9 centimeters. Now the fiberglass was at 3.4 centimeters, which means that there was a smaller gap there, and therefore the board was flexing more. And the basalt that was the same thickness as the fiberglass was at 4 centimeters. So it was slightly less flex than what we used on the hull, but what we used on the hull was much less flex than we got from the fiberglass. So therefore, the basalt flexes less, and that means our hull is going to be a stiffer hull, which is exactly what we want. But if the basalt layers that were equal to the fiberglass layers are actually stiffer than what we used, why didn't we go with that? Well, the answer there is, if you look at the grams over here, you can see that we reduced the number of grams down to 1250 from 1550. And so what that does is reduces the amount of epoxy that's put in. And since basalt cloth is slightly heavier than fiberglass, if we use the same number of grams of basalt as we do a fiberglass, then the hulls would be heavier. In fact, one of these squares of the basalt that is the exact same layer thicknesses as the fiberglass weighs 1.52 pounds, where the square of fiberglass weighed 1.41 pounds. So you can see that there's quite a bit of difference there. Now, the basalt that we used, in the thicknesses we used, came out to 1.39 pounds, which is slightly less than the fiberglass and much lighter than the basalt. So our hulls are much stiffer and have slightly more impact resistance than we would have gotten with the fiberglass. So that's a big win for us, and we are very happy that we chose to go with the basalt. Well, as you can see, our fiberglass versus basalt test went really well with our axe, which was a lot of fun. And we did find out that our basalt is a tiny bit lighter, and it's more resistant to flexing, and so we get a stiffer hull, and also more impact resistant slightly than the fiberglass. So that worked out really well. And we also finished fairing the hull, the first layer at least,
with our very own special technique.
Yes, we did come up with that because we have these flexi tools, so it made a difference. So we changed up a bit because of those tools. And we had some help. We have a new friend named Garrett who's also buying a Shonig boat and going to build it or have it built. He's not sure which. He was out seeing which way he wanted to go and see how much work it is to work on the hull. So I'd also like to thank our viewers, you, for watching this video, and our patrons who are around here right now. And we always appreciate both the viewers and our patrons. It really helps us keep going, and that's why we make these videos. If we didn't have you guys, we wouldn't do it.
So please like and subscribe and click on the bell icon to be notified of our next video.
And we're going to see you next week because we're getting to an interesting spot here. We're going to finish up all of the fairing next week on the port hull. Now we're getting ready to roll that baby. So we'll see if we get to that next week. All right, see you then.
Bye.